If you're like me, you probably first heard about Dragon Quest Adventure of Dai after he was announced to be a playable character in Jump Force, which probably wasn't the best first impression, but hey, at least he made the roster. Looking back at when the series first released, the manga ran from the late 80s to the mid 90s, meaning that it's older than a majority of popular anime today. With a long-running history, it's shocking to see that there haven't been many games to adapt the story and characters from Adventure of Dai. But back in 2020, there were announcements that Dai would be getting 3 games coming in the near future, and as of right now, all 3 of those have been released. The first of those was a mobile game called A Hero's Bond, but of course that was shut down in April of 2023. It seemed like a standard mobile game you'd see on the App Store with microtransactions, so it's not the best way to experience the story. Although the graphics didn't look too terrible for what it was. Then there was another game called Crossblade, but you'd only be playing that in Japanese arcades. The gameplay seemed a bit boring from what I've seen, and it's more of a button mashing simulator than anything else. Even still, it was a card-based battle game, which isn't much to be excited about. If you've been to Dave & Buster to play the Injustice card battle games, then you already know why I'd say that. But outside of those two, there was one other game that seemed to be a standout announcement. It was an action RPG titled Infinity Strash. Unlike the other two, you can actually play this one today without having to take a trip over to Japan, so basically this is all we have to work with. So today we're jumping into one of the first games based on the fan favorite anime adaptation Dragon Quest Adventure of Dai. Since there's not a lot to match it up with, I'm hoping this ends up being something that's worth bringing the series back into the spotlight. Although I have a sneaky suspicion that it probably won't. But hey, you can let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. You start off your journey fighting against the Dragon Knight Baran in the tutorial. You get a chance to see a decent amount of the abilities that you have during this one fight, which obviously leads to Baran stripping all of those powers away right after the tutorial is over. Side note, but something about this feature in a lot of games does make me happy. It's when you're able to get a taste of your maximum potential and then you work your way all the way through the game to get back to that point again. By the end of the tutorial, Dai not only loses his power, but also the memories of his past. And this is how we transition into the beginning of our journey as we're going back through these memories from the very start. As we start the campaign, we have a few different types of levels we'll be playing through. Well, mostly playing, but we'll get to that in a sec. Story quests have both plot and combat, so you do get some cutscenes mixed in with some major battles against opponents. The free quests allow you to construct your own parties for battles, and these are probably the best for when you need to level grind. You'll be put up against hordes of enemies and won't have to worry about any plot or cutscenes here. And finally, adventure quests will only be plot but can be skipped and viewed at any time. And that might be a good option for those of you who have already seen the anime yourself and don't need much of a refresher, because you're not gonna see too much new content here when it comes to how the story was adapted. Just be warned, because you may be skipping over more than half the game if you don't watch these cutscenes. And this is where things start to get a little bit sad. Many parts of the story are shown through these slideshows and voiceovers that explain what happens. It's probably the most disappointing part of the whole package, since this is about 90% of what you'll be seeing. And there are some well-animated cutscenes that appear a few times every chapter, but it looks like most of the budget went into this than anything else. It got so bad to the point where part of me wondered if it would have been better to just put the anime in here straight up. I've seen other games do that in the past, and while I think it is a bit lazy, I think I'd prefer that over a PowerPoint presentation. And I wouldn't complain about it too much if it weren't for there being so much of it. Like, there's a few chapters with more story sections than actual gameplay. So it's almost like you're just stuck there watching a watered down version of the anime. Even if it was only for the most important parts, having the anime be here instead would have made so much more sense. Being someone who hasn't watched the anime or read the manga yet, I can't even lie and say that this is what I wanted for my first leap into the series. If you came into this expecting details and recaps of the whole story, you will get a chunk of it with full voice acting. But it just felt like it was missing the soul of these moments as they show you screenshots with some filters on top. Also, if you wanted to see the entire series, you're only going to see half of it here. Compared to the most recent 2020 anime, the story only goes up to the first 40 episodes. So there's still about 60 more episodes of plot that you just won't get to play through. And I thought maybe they're saving that for a sequel, but we'll have to see about that one. I'd be shocked to see them finish this through DLC, but hey, who knows. But moving on to the fighting, the combat here is very simple, and part of that may turn off many of the fans. It's not like I'm expecting some Elden Ring levels of complexity here, but there isn't much depth or difficulty. You're given a very basic combo system with only one button, and then you have some abilities that you can use off cooldown. Each character plays differently and is based on classes like Swordsman, Mage, and Fighter. First we have Dai, who uses multiple swords throughout the story. His main abilities are his Strash attacks, which are infused with elements and deal a decent amount of damage. Then we have Pop, who uses magic as his main focus. He's best for mid-range combat and can deal a lot of damage if you use him correctly. Of course, his weakness being that he has lower defense and is usually more vulnerable in up-close combat. Then we get to Mam, and that's where I start to have mixed feelings. She's one of the two playable characters that has different styles of gameplay. If you look at her on the cover art, she may look different than when we first meet her in the story. That's because the cover art version is of her martial arts style, where she can throw some devastating punches and has a nice little combo flow. I prefer playing as her in this style, but unfortunately we don't start off with that. Her first style gives her a gun that shoots out magical shots. Between shots she needs to reload, and that kills a lot of momentum for many of her fights. Luckily in the story they don't force you to use her too often, but I'm glad to have that extra choice for her. Finally, the last character we play as is Hyunkel, and he also has two different styles. The first style we get is his Dark Armor Blade. Here he plays pretty similar to Dai with the sword techniques, with the difference being that he's a bit slower but more powerful. Later on he gets a Dark Armor Spear, which is still pretty similar but with a spear instead of a sword. Between all these characters, I'd say that Dai felt the best to me, but you have plenty of variety as you make your way through the campaign. Most of these characters will have attacks with very similar elements like fire and electricity, or since this is Dragon Quest, Frizz and Zap. And each one has signature moves of their own that you can activate with their special gauges. And of course, this is an RPG at the end of the day, so we gotta have the equipment to customize our builds. The bond memories act as stat boosts that you can equip to each character. They're these cards that are themed after specific characters and scenes from the manga. And even the cards themselves will give you boosts that relate to what's happening on each card. Things like increasing attack and defense or powering up a unique ability. So you may receive cards that have boosts that only apply to one character or their moves. There's plenty of variety in the magic and abilities that you have, with many more being unlocked as you progress through the story. As you do complete missions, you add even more to your shared scrapbook, which gives you a full overview of the entire story thus far. It's pretty much a way to watch cutscenes and story segments that you've already seen, which is cute, I guess. I still think your time is better spent watching the anime, but you already know that by now. Seeing how the story can be heavy on the slideshows at times and doesn't offer much in terms of gameplay, it's nice to know that there's at least one other thing that you can do to break the monotony. After you reach chapter 2, you'll unlock the Temple of Recollection. This is a totally separate mode that plays like your typical roguelike. You get reset back down to level 1 and you're put in random rooms that give you temporary bonuses after each one. If you ask me, I'd say this mode was fun, but still fairly lacking. If you compare this to most other roguelikes, the rooms that you teleport to are all basically the same square shape with not a lot special going on. You do have the option of choosing the portals that you go through and whether you want increases to damage, magic, or even some treasure. But once you do play through it a few times, you'll start to feel like it's a grind for bond memories that help out a ton in the challenge mode. You'll need to sink at least a few hours into this if you want to upgrade your skills, so it'll extend your playtime for sure. But if you're not interested in facing the challenge mode, then you might want to pass on doing too much with it. Speaking of the challenge mode, I'll even admit that I didn't get as far as I would like to in it. This unlocks as soon as you finish the main story, and it's a series of very tough boss battles. Like, even looking from online, there doesn't seem to be any one way to make it easier to get through these, with people spending hours on each fight. Between these and the temple, you can put a lot of time into this if you don't mind grinding. But after all this, that's pretty much all of what Infinity Strash has to offer. I wish that there was more to the exploration and more of an adventure here, especially since this is the adventure of Dai. I just found it a bit lame that there wasn't enough to keep me interested for a very long time. Now it does make me want to go and watch the anime for myself, but that's besides the point. From what I've heard from longtime fans, you'd be fine to skip through the story if you already know what happens. Like, it's an okay refresher for the major parts of the plot, but the presentation is what's lacking the most. I wouldn't rush out and buy this at full price, so it might be better to wait for a sale if you can. Without any online modes and the replay value being held up by the temple and challenge mode, it's something for you to come back to and grind, but that's just about it. But what do you think about Infinity Strash? And let me know if you want to see more games from the adventure of Dai in the future. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you all in the next video.